Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about electricity in your home. We have this idea in our heads that the incandescent light bulb was developed, the electrical distribution system was developed, and everybody got electricity in their homes and lighting in their homes. Nothing could be further from the truth. You see, incandescent lighting had been worked on for a number of years and with lots of difficulty and problems, and a fellow by the name of Swan over in England developed a system that kind of worked, but it needed more help. And then, of course, you had the Edison team, which developed a system in 1879, but it needed more help too. And it wasn't until 1882 that New York City had a lighting system. And when we say that New York City was lit by Edison in 1882, we're kind of exaggerating a little bit. It was a couple of blocks. It was Pearl Street. Pearl Street right next to Wall Street. And who was funding a good deal of all this? J.P. Morgan. Therefore, just that gentle area got lit up. It was not that large an area, just several blocks. J.P. Morgan's home was lit, of course, with a self-controlled unit, a DC system. And J.P. Morgan was somewhat of a gadget freak. He kind of liked that. And so he had like a wheel above his bed where he could turn it and turn on his lights, turn them off. There was a power generator in the back of his home, which turned out to be a wonderful place for cats to hang out. And they all screamed and hollered and drove the neighbors crazy. And plus, the generator had a thumping sound to it that kind of bothered people. So they had to put big rubber cushions underneath it to cut down the sound and chase out the cats. And the thing is, that was far and few between. Most people did not have electric lighting. In fact, let's go up to about the year 1890. Maybe 10% of the United States had electric lights. And maybe I'm being far too generous in that. Big cities, wealthy individuals. And even when we got to big cities, it was only certain expensive and wealthy areas within the city that were lit. The rest was not. Everybody else had gas, and most people were very happy with gas lighting. And the thing is that I must say that people were pretty happy. Electricity was kind of neat. People were kind of terrified of it too. But let's just think. Look at the time of the 1870s when the light bulb was developed, in the end of the 1870s, in the Edison part. You had the centennial celebration of 1876. And what was the big thing in the middle of it all was a great big steam engine. This was the age of steam. This was the Industrial Revolution. And it wasn't the age of electricity. Steam was king. And of course, in that centennial celebration, there was one thing. It was called the telephone. It drove Edison crazy. He was jealous as hell about it. But that's another story which we can talk about. And so the Edison team developed their light bulb, and the electrical distribution system, which was DC, which didn't cover a big distance. It couldn't go that far. DC would eventually find itself perfect for an enclosed unit. A ship. A small area of lighting, a building. A car. Your car runs on DC. It's perfect. DC is the perfect system for an enclosed unit. And then, of course, the Westinghouse team developed the AC system, which was developed by many people, including Nikola Tesla, who was an absolute electrical genius. And the thing is that the AC system could send electricity as far as you like, practically. Now, did that mean people got lots of electricity? No. Because it was expensive. It was just basically for the very wealthy. And where that AC system of Westinghouse first got its great show was at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, and then they went to Niagara Falls and set up a whole electrical system, a hydroelectrical system. And the Edison system was quickly working its way to the technological junk heap, but it would take a while for it to get there. And it's an interesting thing that a lot of homes would be lit by DC power because they were standalone systems, and it was perfect for that. And you took care of everything. You know, I went to Sagamore Hill, which was the home of Theodore Roosevelt. And I went there with some friends. I guess this was right around 1999, 2000, something like that. And we went to Sagamore Hill, and I am always curious. I'll always ask questions. And when we went there, we went to the first room in this tour, and I asked questions. We got to the second room of the tour. I asked questions. We got to the third room, and the whole group just turned around, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And they said, "No, we like your questions." And I said, "Okay, good." And so I asked a question that I thought was very relative to the place. And that was, all in this room were lots of electric lights. And I said, "When was this house electrified?" They said, "Good question. 1918. And I thought that's pretty interesting because, you know, Roosevelt had been president from 1901 to 1909, and he was surrounded with electric lighting, and everything was electric, and then he went home and nothing was electric. But obviously he didn't seem to mind. And the house did not get electrified until 1918. Now, I'm gathering, most probably, it had a standalone unit, which would be DC. That kind of would make sense. I remember another place I went to. I went to the Adams National Historic Site. And this is going back in the 2004 or something like that, maybe. Yeah, I guess around 2004, 2003. And I was involved with a lot of Edison stuff at the time. And when I was there, one of the heads of that facility, that national park, came and said, "You know, I've got a question for you." And I said, "Okay." They said, "When Brooks Adams electrified the Adams homestead, did he go with Edison or Tesla?" And I said, "Well, it depends. I mean, if you have a standalone unit within the house, most probably it was DC. However, if it was from a city power plant, it would most probably be AC." And so that led us on an adventure, and we went through the whole house, through the basement, up by the attic, through the back doors, and through various rooms that no one ever goes through. And we finally found a small little room by the first floor, in between like the basement and the first floor. And there was evidence in the wood of like some carbon, you know, from smoke and stuff like that. And then I looked around and I found a small chimney. And then I found some wires and stuff like that digging around. And so it turned out that they had a standalone unit within the building. And so I told him most probably it was an Edison system, a DC system, which was perfect for a house. And I said they built this cute little chimney, which they built very carefully so it would fit. And you wouldn't really notice it. And the people there said they had never noticed it. And so it was kind of cool. It was a great voyage of discovery. One of the interesting discoveries at the Adams homestead. You know, another thing that's interesting with electricity, of course, is, as I said, only the wealthy had it. The house I live in here was lit by gas and only electrified a number of years later, and they ran the electric wires through the gas lines. Gas was fine. Gas was everywhere. An interesting thing as well is even though steam was the power of great factories and stuff like that, as we go into the 20th century, you see the change. Whereas steam had removed the power of water wheels, electricity, by the beginnings of the 20th century, had overtaken steam. And if you take a look at even the person who developed the incandescent light and his system, Thomas Edison, in his West Orange workshop, it's powered by massive electric motors, and then went to a series of belts to all the machines. But you think about the average house. Did the average house have electric light? No. Did it have anything electrical? No. You had batteries for things. You know, even Edison came up with a phonograph, a Class M electric. It ran on batteries. They tried a water-powered one. That went nowhere. And it wasn't until we get into the teens that a lot of places started to get electrified. And you really didn't have massive grids of electric lighting yet. It's an interesting thing to note. And by the 20s, electricity is pretty much moving around. Interesting thing. You get more torque with DC, so like I can say in New York City, lots of buildings with elevators use DC as their power system. And they used DC as we went and worked our way almost into the 21st century. There were still a handful of DC systems still running on the elevator system. So how did all the houses around the country finally get electrified? It's an interesting thing. It didn't happen in the 19th century, and little bits of it happened in the early 20th. But it wasn't until we get well into the 1920s, into the radio age, and then the big boom that would connect smaller communities around the country would take place during the time of the Great Depression. When the stock market crashed in 1929, things slowly ground to a halt. By the early 30s, we were in the grips of a worldwide economic depression. And the Roosevelt administration in 1933 started the WPA, the Work Project Association or Administration. And they were building bridges and post offices and all kinds of stuff. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that they worked on the electric grid, and that's how a lot of homes got connected to the electric grid, was through the WPA projects. So when we think of electric lighting in homes, it's not quite as early as one would think. Also, it happens to do with geography, where you were located. If you were in the city, you had a better chance of getting electricity earlier. But if you were in rural communities, that didn't come knocking at your door until the 1930s or 1940s. And that's a long time ago, but still, when you think about the electrical age, it was pretty late. Thought I'd share this with you. Something interesting to think about. Thanks.